Listen, you're not gonna find anything on me, okay? Trust me.
Empty your pockets into the tray, sir, or we'll have to. Your pockets, sir?
Lady, the problem isn't in my pants.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it's time to talk about all things X-Men. It's time for This Week in X-Men, where I bring the X-Men historian, the Marvel aficionado himself, Doc, on the channel. And obviously, we're knee-deep in Ten of Swords right now. We're going to be covering chapters 9 and 10, covered in Excalibur number 13 and X-Men number 13. We've got a big retcon to Apocalypse's character and some of the history. We've had another retelling of the split of Arakko, and we'll get into all that. Doc, how you doing?
I am doing spectacular, other than the fact that it feels like I'm being stabbed in the back with a giant knife.
All right, let's see. Your back's still hurting.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I do want to say this. I'm in the middle of a tropical storm right now, so if you hear a little bit of noise, that is the weather. I cannot turn it off, and there's no reason to wait for it because it is not going to stop raining, folks. So we're going to power on through it. I do apologize if the audio quality isn't quite as good as normal. And I also want to say, if this is your first time visiting and you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Give us a thumbs down if you don't. Now, Doc, Excalibur 13 is actually Chapter 9. X-Men number 10, or 13, is actually Chapter 10. But we're going to cover them backwards because they don't exactly tie into each other. And the X-Men stuff is much more interesting because of the Apocalypse retcon and Excalibur just... We'll get to Excalibur. It's got issues. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Now again, I would caution against calling ourselves knee-deep in X of Swords. We are knee-deep in the prelude to the actual crossover that they decided to slap a bunch of chapter numbers on to convince us we needed to buy, even though we didn't need to buy them. Because these are just about people getting swords.
We're still knee-deep in the quest for swords. This is actually the very end of it as we get Ten of Swords Stasis next week, which I'm going to review solo here on the channel, I believe, on Wednesday. And then Doc and I are going to talk about what we're expecting for Ten of Swords moving forward on next week's This Week in X-Men. But getting to it, we get the big retcon on Apocalypse. Again, we get the retelling of Arakko's split, where the hordes are coming through the breach. It's basically Apocalypse and Genesis and his four horsemen are holding the line, and they're being quite successful, but they realize they're going to have to go into the breach to stop this, and Apocalypse wants to go with them, and it turns out he's too weak, and his wife, Genesis, leaves him behind, and she says, stay, use what time we buy you to make this world into something that can stand against our enemy, obviously the hordes that are trying to come through. Judge them, my love, judge them, so that you become what we need, see that only the fittest remain. Obviously a reference to Apocalypse's entire character mission.
Yes. So we're essentially told in this that his kind of lifelong quest and plan has been basically assigned to him as a quest by his wife, which is interesting because, you especially since this was kind of retconned in at this point. There is a lot of retconning in this. And I think it goes well beyond just the retconning of Apocalypse to the retconning of the entire mutant race. And I kind of dig it. You find out that, Apocalypse's quest for survival of the fittest has had nothing to do with actually really finding like the fittest, or had everything to do with putting together essentially an army to protect the world from whatever comes through the breach out of, Arakko, and it would be Arakko now. Amenth. That was what it was. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of interesting. I also think it's interesting. It's a statement when Apocalypse is the weakest among them. I did like that for establishing some degree of stakes with, if Apocalypse is the weakest of that, half dozen that went through there, then what does that say about the X-Men's chance against them, considering that, the X-Men have always had historically at least some degree of issue with confronting Apocalypse.
Yep. Certainly it changes the stakes a bit. I don't mind the retconning. What I have found frustrating is I believe this is the third or fourth time they've told the story or part of the story of the separate, or of Morocco basically being separated in two entities, the breach being, Apocalypse's four horsemen going into the breach and sealing it. And they're changing it every time or adding bits and pieces to it. And I do find it annoying that I'm reading the same story over and over again. But we also get a little bit more information about Genesis herself. She is the most powerful of between Apocalypse and his four horsemen. She's the most powerful that they have. She appears to be some type of combination of Doctor Strange and, Poison Ivy, where she can control vegetation and stuff, but she's obviously using spells. Yeah,
she's much more of the sorceress, and I think that is kind of cool. It's an interesting. I know that they've been adding, Apocalypse being kind of a sorcerer in Excalibur over, since the relaunch. That was something that never really happened. That wasn't really part of his character up until now. He never seemed to really be all that terribly interested in sorcery, but you find out that his first wife she was, I guess, technically probably a master sorceress or something like that, which is interesting. But yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I'm kind of tired of being told essentially the same thing. They did add the thing about, like, what's his name, the White Blade or whatever is the guy in the guy with the helmet in the upper left hand corner. That's one of the sword bearers of that first panel. Mm-hmm. He's going to be one of the sword bearers of Morocco. They added him, so now we know that his blade also comes from Earth. In addition to, we see Apocalypse with his blade there, and we see his wife being kind of more of the field general than Apocalypse ever really was.
Yeah, it was strange. She was absolutely wailing him, but when they did the parlay, they spoke to Apocalypse, so I was a little bit confused about that. So, Doc, I do want to say this before we kind of get into the rest of the story, and I do enjoy this comic. This is a recommend. I'm a little bit turned off by the repetitiveness of some of the storytelling, but the artist on this is Mahmud Asrar, and it's pretty good, but there's like some depth issues. When we're getting things on like this level, the detail and everything's pretty good. But when it backs out a bit and you're getting a further back layer, the detail goes to crap, and I don't like the art there. So the art was a bit uneven. Did you see that as well?
I did. I think that Asrar was either getting a really low page rate for this one, so he didn't feel like putting in the time, or he was in a huge rush and trying to meet a deadline, so he didn't put in the time. I don't know if Asrar normally inks himself. If he does, then this is one of his worst inking jobs. But if otherwise, you may add, blame at least some of that on the inker or the colorist. But yeah, it was very uneven on the art. I think that was one of the big flaws of it. Now, again, though, as you said, like the close range shots look great. It's just a lot of the background is.
Yeah, it's like this one shot over here underneath the gold mask. A lot of this in the comic book, actually.
Yeah.
Frustrating. So getting to these pages, this is one of the more interesting aspects of it. We know Annihilation is essentially the leader of Amen. This is the character that killed Genesis. But we kind of learned that Annihilation isn't really a person. It is that mask itself, and it's kind of whoever wears the mask is controlled by Annihilation. And this definitely kind of backs up our thoughts that Genesis is actually going to be underneath that mask as the one that's probably going to be taking on Apocalypse. It was a cool introduction. This was probably my second favorite part of the old comic, to be honest.
Yeah, I liked seeing whenever they brought in like the box, and then the box starts talking. Yeah, and telling them, like, open me up, and and then they throw on the mask. I do like that it's some sort of, I don't know if the mask itself is necessarily the character, or if it's possessed by something, or if it's like a connection into another realm, like into Amenth, because maybe Annihilation can't actually set foot in our world, so it does it via proxy. I don't know, but it is cool. I like that it is a bit of a twist, and it does lead towards our theory that it's probably Genesis under that mask, but
because to survive the mask, you have to be a very powerful character. If you're a weak person, obviously you see what happened to this one. He's disintegrating. That guy was already weak to begin with. But a character that's powerful in Genesis could put on the mask, obviously would be controlled, but their physical form would actually survive it.
Yeah. And obviously, considering that Apocalypse was the weakest of those going, of the champions of Araka or Krakoa, Genesis would obviously be significantly stronger and likely able to survive wearing the mask for prolonged periods of time.
Yep. So the last thing I want to talk about, this is the quest for swords.
Yeah.
And this is probably my favorite part. They actually go back to
Egypt.
Yeah, Apocalypse's temple, and he goes in there, and you can see that there's 4 coffins with probably some sarcophagus in there. Those are obviously to his 4 horsemen. He thought they were dead. He didn't think he didn't think they survived the breach, and he was like, this temple isn't a monument to the dead anymore, and he destroys the coffins and picks up his scarab blade so he can join in the fight.
Yeah, I did too. I like a lot of the Apocalypse reconnecting back with Egypt thing. However, I am, as I said earlier, I did say that, this kind of retconned a lot with Apocalypse, but it also kind of retcons a lot with mutantdom in general. And so instead of Apocalypse being a mutant that comes from Egypt, that was just where he rose to power. Mm-hmm. It seems. So they've kind of retconned his Egyptian origin away. And I think that this was kind of a, in addition to the fact that, he's eliminating the sarcophagus from the people that he thought were dead that aren't actually dead, and, getting his blade, he destroyed his temple. And that pyramid was where he would always go back to recharge, and when he'd go into like his hibernation periods. So it's kind of a symbolic wiping away of his Egyptian connection, which is interesting, because there was always that, like, okay, well, if he knew Krakoa and Arako and Okara long before this, then, but he came from Egypt. What the hell? Like, there was always that confusion, and this is kind of symbolically wiping that away too.
Yep. So I don't know. Talking about it, I'm going to up my grade. It's no longer a 3.5-star comic. This is a 4-star. Highly recommend. There are some issues with retelling the same story over and over. There are some issues with the art as far as the depth and everything, but I think overall this is actually really solid, and I quite enjoyed it. Even the retconning, which I think falls in line with what we've learned a lot within the Dawn of X. Now, moving on to Excalibur 13, I do not recommend this comic book. I am giving it 2 stars because the art from R.B. Silva is absolutely badass.
Awesome.
And it actually, there is a story here. There's a beginning, middle, and end. There is a story. It's just really convoluted. The dialogue is terrible. So I'll give it a 2-star because the art's great. And there is a story. It's just not executed very well. So let's get into some of this really, really weird dialogue. At the beginning, we see Brian Braddock. Obviously, he's no longer Captain Britain. It's Betsy Braddock as Captain Britain. I guess he wants to amulet back, or at least that's what people want people to think. We've got Sir Jamie, their crazy brother, in the background. And he's like, "Come here, serious girl. Let me have one good hug before everything goes pear-shaped." And she says, "What is on your hip? I brought it for you." That's weird for a brother to say that to a sister. I'm just saying that.
Yes, it is.
Is that a blade on your hip, or are you just happy to see me, brother? Well, I don't want it. Take it to Krakoa and stick it in the sigil. The Sword of Might was named for the prophecy. The prophecy, obviously, that Saturnyne said. Betsy, as in the prophecy, Betsy, as were we, one of us has to wield it. It's all yours. So it's obviously who's going to wield the Sword of Might and enter the circle as far as the champions of Krakoa. And the dialogue from Jamie Braddock is just so weird. When they finally, what's her name? Saturnyne comes up. She said, "I sent you to greet our guest." She's talking to Jamie. Not to belittle them. "Come in, please. I prepared. I've prepared. I've had 10 prepared. My bad." And he says, "Oh, my lady Saturnyne, are we the first of the provinces to arrive? Need an extra morning to sniff my brother's pillow. So it's true what they say, that the new king of Avalon is a babbling madman. What a shame. I know your family so well, I'd hope we could reach some sort of understanding. You can get to know me just as well. I don't mind if you sniff my pillow." I get
okay.
It's really stupid. And, it's kind of disrespectful to people with mental issues. So, I don't know. Just every time any of this stuff goes to Otherworld, I hate it.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I was never a huge. I liked Excalibur, the original run. I liked some of the other ones that have come since. But I was never a huge Excalibur fan, and I was never a huge fan of whenever they get into the Otherworld stuff. Even whenever they did the Otherworld story in Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force, I felt it was the weakest part of that whole run. And this is holding up to about my expectations when it comes to Otherworld, where it's nonsensical crap and a bunch of fantasy hokum.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. Titty Howard,
pretentious bullshit.
Right? It's obvious. Bullshit. The dialogue in here is awful, and this is a dialogue-heavy issue, I'll tell you that. But really, the story of this comic book is the story of Brian Braddock. And at first, he and Betsy are bickering, and she's like, "Take the sword." And he's like, "I'm not going to take it when I'm angry." And then all of a sudden, someone dissolves the sheath on the sword, and he accidentally have it. And you see he's now Captain Avalon. Which actually looks pretty cool, to be honest.
Yeah, I can kind of get behind that look. He's has to follow Jamie as Jamie is his king. Now I will say, come on. Yes, it's a dialogue heavy issue, but do we really think Tini Howard's capable of writing something that is not dialogue heavy?
Probably not. It's all
it's
really bad. Show. There's a point where Saturnyne wants the amulet back because she doesn't want Betsy Braddock to be Captain Britain anymore. And she's like, "Screw it, I don't need the amulet anyway," and destroys it. And they're playing it up, and she even speaks a little bit of Krakoa in there. I don't buy into much of Krakoa's sorcery, whatever that word is. I imagine that's Apocalypse's sorcery.
Yeah. No, that's A. Remember, he's going by that dash equals A equals dash.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's silly. So there's all this stupid fighting going on, but Brian does end up with the sword. He's Captain Avalon, and it's pissing off Saturnyne. It turns out she's doing all this because she wants to bed Brian.
Yeah, she's all. I mean, I know that she's always had a bit of a thing for Brian. He's always shoved off her advances because of Megan, and
Hey,
now
Doc, we're
it
at 20
looks,
minutes, man. We gotta
well,
wrap it up.
now it seems like, as Captain Avalon and carrying the Sword of Might, he has a bit of a different personality. Maybe he's going to actually kind of go for it with Saturnyne. And so she gets there, she takes him, to bed, and she wants to give him an even better sword than the Sword of Might. The
Twilight sword.
I thought it was a Starlight sword.
The Starlight sword. The Twilight sword, I think, is actually from Krakoa or whatever.
Or
I think you're right.
Yeah.
But it's silly because it turns out it's a trap. They were trying to fool Saturnyne the whole time, and they needed to get Brian in there to get a hold of the other sword so they get a hands on him. And she's like, how could this happen? I couldn't see anything happen. It turns out that Jamie was in on it the whole time. Maybe he's not stark raving mad, but it's stupid. It makes Saturnyne, even though I guess she's overall eminently powerful, but she's so stupid she couldn't realize what her own prophecy meant. Like you read the prophecy that she says to where they have to get the swords, it is
pretty clear that it's going to
Polaris. She's speaking through Polaris. It's quite evident who every single one of those people is. Like, how did she not know it was these two?
Yeah, she knew it was going to be both of the twins with different swords. Come on.
And she named off the swords.
Yeah, exactly. So she's giving him. Yeah. How did she think that they were going to get the sword that she pulls out of the building itself if it doesn't come from her? What the hell? I mean, and if we look at it from this, there's still a number of plot holes with, even looking at it in the very condensed version that we did, but there was a bunch of other stuff that was just completely nonsensical in this. I have no idea what the hell's going on with the Jubilee and.
Oh, hold on. We're going to get to that.
Okay.
But at the end of the comic book, they enter the circle, and we've got seven of the 10 sword bearers of Krakoa. Obviously, Apocalypse is going to take one of those slots. I believe Gorgon's going to take another. I'm not sure who the 10th member is. It hasn't exactly been spelled out, but they do need that to happen in Stasis. But there is this other part, and we're going to do this very briefly because we don't have much time left. But the new Captain Britain Corps shows up, and obviously there's Rogue, there's Gambit, there's Jubilee. I'm told the other one is Richter. I don't know how that is. If you're following the story, that's a plot hole. But Jubilee gets killed here, Doc. Doesn't that mean that that in Krakoa they have to follow the protocols and shut everything down and destroy all the eggs because they're all going to be corrupted now? Jubilee can never come back again.
Yeah, none of this makes sense. Now, granted, again, I haven't read Excalibur up until the last issue. What was it, 12? So maybe they have extras of Rogue and Gambit and Richter and Jubilee that have already been hatched and just made into Captain Britons that we're unaware of. But the way that they're treating them like they're the actual characters, I got no idea. Did we miss something? Because Jubilee and
we
Gambit
obviously did, but it's not very well stated out here.
It's really not. And if this is where editor's notes would be very, very helpful, because if you only read issues 12 and 13, Gambit and Jubilee were running around in some citadel in the last issue perfectly normal, and this issue they show up as if they've been Captain Britons forever. So what the hell?
Yeah, it's pretty stupid. Actually, on retrospect, this is going down to a 1.5. Really, the only thing redeeming about this story is R.B. Silva's art, which is spectacular. It's phenomenal. But the dialogue, the pacing, the convoluted nature of mess of this story is terrible, even though it does have a beginning, a middle, and end. This is not a recommend. Obviously, X-Men is a highly recommend 4-star comic. That'll do it today, Doc. Obviously, we're going to be taking next week off with Stasis. I'm going to reviewing that solo, but we will have something else to talk about next Sunday. Got anything else to say before we wrap this up?
Order X-Men 17.